I thought I had the perfect marriage until that Thursday afternoon when I came home early. What I discovered wasn't just my wife in bed with another man. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would threaten my very life. 9 different men, a deadly secret, and a betrayal so deep it can never be forgiven. This is how I lost everything I thought was real, and how I found the strength to walk away from the woman who gambled with my life. My name is Michael Donovan. I'm 42 years old, and I thought I had the perfect marriage. I used to be the guy others envied. My friends would elbow me at barbecues and say things like, "Man, you hit the jackpot with Rebecca." And they weren't wrong, at least about how amazing she seemed. Rebecca was the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. Not just because she was beautiful, though she was with her auburn hair and those green eyes that could pierce right through you, but because she had this energy. She was quick-witted, always ready with a clever comeback, and genuinely interested in people. When she asked you how you were doing, she actually listened to the answer. We met in college, dated for 3 years, and have been married for 15. 15 years of building a life together in our colonial-style house in the suburbs of Boston. We had routines, inside jokes, and a comfortable silence that only comes from truly knowing someone. I was happy, or at least I thought I was. My work required frequent travel. Sometimes I'd be gone for 2 weeks at a stretch. But I never worried about leaving Rebecca alone. I trusted her completely. In fact, I used to tell myself how lucky I was that my wife was so independent, so capable of managing everything while I was gone. When I'd return from my trips, she'd welcome me home with a smile and my favorite meal. We'd catch up over dinner, and she'd tell me about her book club meetings, her shopping trips with her sister, and the new restaurant she'd tried with her friends. Everything seemed so normal, so perfect. "I missed you," she would say, squeezing my hand across the table. "Missed you too," I'd reply, and I meant it. Every time. For years, this was our life. I traveled, she held down the fort, and when I came home, we'd slip back into our comfortable routine. I never had a reason to doubt her, never had a reason to suspect that anything was wrong. Looking back, there were signs, of course. The way she'd flinch sometimes when I touched her unexpectedly. The mysterious phone calls that ended abruptly when I walked into the room. The new friends whose names I'd hear once and then never again. But I was too busy, too trusting, too in love to connect the dots. I've spent a lot of time thinking about those early years, trying to pinpoint exactly when things started to go wrong. But the truth is, I'm not sure there was a specific moment. Maybe the cracks were there from the beginning, and I just chose not to see them. But eventually, even the blind have to face the light. And for me, that moment of clarity came on a random Thursday in April when I decided to surprise my wife by coming home early. Little did I know, the surprise would be on me. If I'm being honest with myself, there were signs long before that fateful day in April. Little things that I brushed aside or rationalized away because it was easier than facing what they might mean. The most obvious change was in our bedroom. Our intimate life, once spontaneous and passionate, had gradually dwindled until it became almost non-existent. I remember when it started, about 3 years into my new position with its increased travel schedule. At first, I chalked it up to the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. We were busy, stressed, often physically apart. It made sense that things would cool off. "I'm just tired tonight," Rebecca would say, rolling away from me when I tried to initiate something. "Maybe tomorrow." But tomorrow rarely came. Eventually, after enough rejections, I stopped trying altogether. That's what hurts the most now. How easily I accepted the distance growing between us. How I convinced myself it was just a phase. Then there were the calls. Rebecca used to stay on the phone with me for hours when I was away, telling me about her day, asking about mine. We'd fall asleep together, phone lines open, pretending we weren't hundreds of miles apart. But gradually, our calls became shorter. She always had somewhere to be, something to do. "Can we talk later? I'm heading out to meet Jennifer for coffee," she'd say. Or, "Sorry, babe, book club's running late tonight." I never questioned these explanations. Jennifer had been her friend since college, and the book club had been meeting every Wednesday for years. Why would I suddenly doubt her? Perhaps the most telling sign was her reaction when I'd announce an upcoming trip. In the early years of our marriage, she'd pout playfully, make me promise to call every night, and plan something special for when I returned. But as time passed, Her reaction changed. "Oh, where did this time?" she'd ask, her voice casual, almost relieved. "Chicago, for a week." I might answer, "Well, that's not too bad. I'll keep busy, don't worry about me." And I didn't. I never worried about her when I was gone. Never once imagined she might be living another life behind my back. There was one incident, about 8 months before everything fell apart, that should have been my wake-up call. I came home from a 3-day trip to New York and found an unfamiliar leather jacket hanging in our coat closet. Men's size large. I'm a medium. "Whose jacket is this?" I asked Rebecca, holding it up. She barely glanced at it. "Oh, that's Mark's. From book club. He left it here last week when they all came over for wine after the meeting." I kept forgetting to text him about it. I nodded and put the jacket back. Mark. I'd heard his name a few times, but never met him. One of the only men in a predominantly female book club, apparently. It seemed plausible. The next day, the jacket was gone. I didn't think about it again until months later, after everything had come crashing down around me. By then, I knew there probably never was a Mark from book club. Just like there probably weren't as many late nights with Jennifer as Rebecca had claimed. But I had no reason to doubt her then. Or maybe I just didn't want to see what was right in front of me. Because sometimes, ignorance feels a whole lot like bliss. Until it doesn't. I wasn't supposed to be home until Friday. I had meetings scheduled in Dallas through Thursday afternoon, followed by a company dinner that evening. But when the client unexpectedly canceled the afternoon session, I saw an opportunity to surprise Rebecca. I caught an earlier flight, didn't tell a soul, and arrived home on Thursday around 2 p.m. instead of Friday night. In hindsight, maybe surprises aren't always the gift we think they are. The house was unusually quiet when I walked in. No TV humming in the background. No music playing from the kitchen speaker where Rebecca usually danced while preparing dinner. Just silence. Heavy, unsettling silence. "Rebecca." I called out, dropping my suitcase by the door. No answer. I checked the kitchen first. Empty. The living room, also empty. Her home office, nothing. A quick peek outside showed her car in the driveway, so I knew she was home. That's when I heard it. A soft moan coming from upstairs. My first thought was that she was ill. Maybe she caught that flu that had been going around, the one that had knocked out half my office last month. I took the stairs 2 at a time, concern propelling me forward. "Babe, you okay?" I called as I approached our bedroom door. The moaning stopped abruptly. There was rustling, whispering, then silence. I should have known then. I should have prepared myself for what I would see when I pushed open that door. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the sight of my wife scrambling to cover herself with our bedsheets, while a man I'd never seen before frantically gathered his clothes from her bedroom floor. Time seemed to stop. The air left my lungs. The world narrowed to a pinpoint focus on this nightmare unfolding in my own bedroom. "Michael." Rebecca's voice sounded distant, as if she were calling to me from underwater. You're early." The man, tall, muscular, probably in his early 30s, didn't look at me. He mumbled something to Rebecca that I couldn't hear and slipped into our en-suite bathroom with his clothes bundled in his arms. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, unable to speak. The room smelled of sex and unfamiliar cologne. On the nightstand was an open bottle of wine, my wine from the collection I'd been saving for special occasions, and 2 half-empty glasses. "I can explain," Rebecca said, clutching the sheet to her chest, her face flushed with either exertion or embarrassment. "Maybe both." "Explain what?" I finally found my voice, though it didn't sound like mine. It was cold, detached, as if someone else were speaking through me. "That you're sleeping with another man in our bed, while I'm away working to support us." "It's not like that," she started, but I cut her off with a laugh. A horrible, hollow sound that I barely recognized as coming from me. "Then what is it like, Rebecca? Enlighten me." The bathroom door opened, and the man emerged, now dressed in jeans and a button-up shirt, though his feet were still bare. He looked at me for the first time, and I saw not guilt or shame in his eyes, but annoyance, as if I were the intruder here. "I'm going to go," he said to Rebecca, ignoring me completely. "Call me later. Call me later." Like this was just a temporary interruption to their regularly scheduled program. Like he would be back. In my house. In my bed. With my wife. Something inside me snapped. After the lover left, Rebecca and I locked eyes. The shouting, the accusations, it all faded when I really looked at her. She was thin, too thin. Her skin had a sickly pallor, and she was sweating despite the cool room. "Are you sick?" I asked, cutting through her excuses. She paused mid-sentence. "What? No, I'm fine. Just tired." But she wasn't fine. As she tried to stand, her legs gave out, and she collapsed to the floor before I could catch her. "Rebecca." I knelt beside her. Her skin burned against my touch, her breathing shallow and rapid. "I'm just tired," she insisted weakly. "Maybe a slight fever." "I'm taking you to the hospital," I said, already dialing 911. "No." Her protest was surprisingly forceful. "No hospitals. I just need a rest." I ignored her, gave our address to the dispatcher, and waited with her until the ambulance arrived. At the hospital, they whisked her away for tests while I filled out paperwork. Hours passed. I paced the waiting room, drinking terrible coffee, trying not to replay the scene in our bedroom. Finally, Dr. Patel appeared. "Mr. Donovan, can we speak privately about your wife's condition?" I followed him to a small consultation room, my legs feeling like lead. "Please sit down," he said. I knew then. Whatever he was about to tell me, it was bad. "Mr. Donovan, your wife has tested positive for HIV. The infection has progressed to AIDS." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's impossible," I stuttered. "There must be some mistake." Dr. Patel's expression remained gentle but firm. "I'm afraid there's no mistake. The tests are conclusive." "How long has she?" "Based on her current condition, I would estimate she's been HIV positive for at least a year, possibly longer." "A year. Maybe longer. All those business trips. All those nights away from home. All those opportunities for Rebecca to live another life. A life that had now put both of us at risk." "What about me?" I asked, my mouth dry with fear. "You should be tested as soon as possible," he confirmed. As his words sank in, I felt the floor dropping out from beneath me. My wife had AIDS. She'd been cheating on me. And now my own health, my very life, hung in the balance. They kept Rebecca in the hospital overnight, starting her on a cocktail of medications to combat the immediate threats to her immune system. I stayed too, though not in her room. I couldn't bear to be that close to her yet. By morning, I'd gathered enough courage to face her. When I entered her hospital room, Rebecca was sitting up in bed, staring out the window. She looked diminished against the white pillows, the four in her arm making this nightmare all too real. She turned when I came in. "Michael," she whispered, "you're still here. I need answers, Rebecca." I pulled up a chair but kept my distance. "All of it. The cheating, the disease, everything." She drew a shaky breath. "The man you saw yesterday, Jason, he's not the first." I clenched my jaw but remained silent. "There have been others. 9 in total, over the years." Her voice was barely audible. "Always when you were traveling." 9 men. The number staggered me. "For how long?" 3 years, she admitted. "It started at that company Christmas party. Remember when you couldn't go because of your flight to Chicago? Mark from accounting took me home. One thing led to another." My stomach churned at the casual way she described the beginning of her betrayal. "So, for 3 years, you've been sleeping with other men while I was away working to support us, building our future." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know it sounds horrible. It was horrible. But I felt so alone, Michael. You were gone so much. I was lonely. And the HIV. I asked, my voice flat. "I don't know which one," she said, her eyes downcast. "I started feeling sick about 6 months ago. Fevers, night sweats. I thought it was early menopause at first. By the time I got tested and found out, I was already." She gestured vaguely at her hospital bed. "And you kept sleeping with these men? After your diagnosis?" "No," she exclaimed. "God, no. I stopped everything once I knew. I couldn't risk spreading it." "But you risked my health," I pointed out coldly. "We were intimate at least twice since you say you got your diagnosis." Her face crumpled. "I know. I'm so sorry. I was careful with you. We used protection. I thought. I hoped it would be enough." "You hoped? You gambled with my life based on hope." "I didn't know how to tell you," she sobbed. "How do you tell your husband you've been unfaithful and now you're dying?" I kept trying to find the right moment, but there's no right moment for news like that. I stood up, needing space. "I've been tested. I'm waiting for results." "I'm so sorry," she repeated, reaching for my hand. I stepped back. "I didn't feel sorry for the 9 men my cheating wife had an affair with," I said, finally giving voice to the thought that had been circling my mind all night. Being infected was punishment enough for all of them. I still left. The words hung in the air between us, their implication clear. I was leaving her too, regardless of my test results. The next few weeks passed in a fog of disbelief and resentment. Rebecca was discharged after 5 days with a prescription regimen that required 15 pills daily to keep her condition manageable. The doctors explained that with proper treatment, she could live for many years, possibly decades. Modern medicine had transformed AIDS from a death sentence to a chronic condition. But our marriage? That couldn't be so easily rehabilitated. I moved into the guest bedroom the day she came home. I didn't make a big production of it. Simply took my pillow and some clothes and set up in the room that had previously been reserved for visiting family. Rebecca didn't protest. She knew better. Living under the same roof with someone who had betrayed you so completely was a special kind of torture. Every morning, I'd wake up hoping it had all been a nightmare, only to remember all over again that my life had been shattered beyond recognition. We navigated the house like ghosts, careful to avoid each other. When we did cross paths, our conversations were superficial, limited to practical matters like grocery lists or medication schedules. "I've made an appointment with Dr. Lou for next Tuesday," she might say. "Can you drive me? Or should I call a cab?" "I'll drive you," I'd respond, not out of kindness, but because I couldn't bear the thought of neighbors gossiping about why Rebecca Donovan was suddenly taking taxis to her doctor appointments. I threw myself into work, volunteering for extra assignments that kept me at the office late into the evening. Anything to avoid going home. My colleagues noticed the change, but attributed it to ambition rather than avoidance. My boss was thrilled with my sudden dedication. My marriage was in shambles, but my career was thriving. The irony wasn't lost on me. At night, alone in the guest room, I'd lie awake trying to piece together the woman I thought I knew with the stranger who had lived a double life for years. I scrolled through old photos on my phone, vacations, anniversaries, casual selfies from happier times, searching for clues I might have missed. Had there been a moment when I could have changed the course of our story? A warning sign I should have heeded? The hardest part was the waiting. My initial HIV test came back negative, but the doctor explained that the virus might not show up immediately. I needed to be retested in 3 months to be certain. 3 months of wondering if my wife's betrayal had given me a death sentence. One evening, about a month after Rebecca's diagnosis, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers. "What's all this?" I asked, setting down my briefcase. "I'm organizing my affairs," she said quietly. "Insurance documents, our mortgage, my retirement accounts. I want to make sure you know where everything is and how to access it when... Don't." I cut her off. I couldn't bear her fatalism, not when I was still processing my own potential mortality. "We need to talk about it sometime, Michael," she insisted. "I know you hate me right now." "I don't hate you," I interrupted again, surprised to find it was true. "I hate what you did. I hate that you lied. I hate that you put my health at risk. But I don't hate you." She looked up, her eyes glistening with tears. "That almost makes it worse. Living with uncertainty is its own kind of hell." Every morning, I'd wake up and immediately take inventory of my body. Was it a normal headache, or the first sign of something sinister? Was my fatigue from working overtime, or was the virus already attacking my immune system? A simple cold became a source of terror. Was this the beginning of the end? Dr. Patel had explained that the window period for HIV testing could be up to 3 months. For 12 excruciatingly long weeks, I might be carrying the virus without any test being able to detect it. 12 weeks of limbo. 12 weeks of wondering if Rebecca's betrayal would cost me not just my marriage, but my life. I considered leaving the house, getting a hotel room or a short-term rental, but something kept me there. Maybe it was a misplaced sense of duty toward the woman I had promised to love in sickness and in health. Maybe it was simply inertia, the path of least resistance during a time when making even small decisions felt overwhelming. One night, about 6 weeks after Rebecca's diagnosis, I woke drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Night sweats, one of the symptoms she had described. I sat up in bed, turning on the lamp with trembling hands, certain that this was it, the first definitive sign that I was infected. I must have made noise because Rebecca appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her robe, her face etched with concern. "Michael, are you okay?" "Night sweats," I said, gesturing to my soaked t-shirt. "It's starting." She approached cautiously, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "It could just be a bad dream. You've been under incredible stress." "Don't patronize me," I snapped. "We both know what this means." She sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a careful distance. "The air conditioning broke down an hour ago. It's 80 degrees in here. I was coming to tell you, but you were asleep." I blinked, processing her words. "The AC is broken?" She nodded. "I already called the 24-hour service. They're sending someone tomorrow." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by embarrassment at my panic. I stripped off my wet shirt, avoiding her eyes. "I'm going to take a shower," I said, needing to escape her presence. "Michael," she called as I headed to the bathroom. "It's normal to be afraid." "I'm afraid too." I paused but didn't turn around. "The difference is, your fear is warranted. Mine is just collateral damage from your choices." The words were cruel, but in that moment, cruelty felt like self-preservation. As the 3-month mark approached, my anxiety reached new heights. I scheduled my follow-up test a few days early, unable to wait any longer. The morning of the appointment, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection for any visible sign of the virus that might be rewriting my cellular code, even as I brushed my teeth. Rebecca offered to come with me, but I declined. This was a journey I needed to make alone, regardless of the outcome. In the sterile exam room, as the technician prepared to draw my blood, I found myself holding my breath, as if I could somehow pause time in this moment of not knowing. This final instant before my life would be definitively split into before and after. "This will just take a second," the technician said cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the weight of what she was about to do. I closed my eyes as the needle pierced my skin, wondering if this would be the last normal day of my life. The 2 days after my test were the longest of my life. I couldn't focus on anything beyond checking my phone for missed calls from the clinic. Rebecca kept her distance, sensing my fragility. When my phone finally rang on the 3rd morning, I answered instantly, stepping onto the back porch for privacy. "Mr. Donovan, this is Dr. Patel's office. Your test results are in." My legs nearly gave out. I gripped the railing to steady myself. "Yes, your HIV test is negative. Based on the time elapsed since potential exposure, we can consider this result definitive." The world seemed to stop, then restart in slow motion. "Negative? You're sure?" "Yes, Mr. Donovan. You do not have HIV." I hung up and collapsed on the porch steps, overcome with emotion. Tears came unexpectedly. Relief, gratitude, and grief all mixed together. By some miracle, I had dodged the bullet that had struck Rebecca. When I finally went back inside, she was waiting in the kitchen, her face tight with anxiety. "Was that?" She couldn't finish the question. "I'm negative," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Definitively negative." She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank God. I've been praying every day. I couldn't have lived with myself if..." "If what?" I interrupted. "If your actions had condemned me too? If I had to spend the rest of my life paying for your mistakes?" She flinched, but didn't argue. "Yes," she said simply. "I know I've ruined everything. I know you can never forgive me. But at least you're healthy. At least you can move forward." I needed space to think. I drove for hours, windows down, music loud, letting the clean air fill my lungs. I was negative. I was healthy. I was free of the virus, and potentially free of the marriage that had nearly destroyed me. The relief was overwhelming. But as euphoria faded, more complicated emotions surfaced. I didn't feel sorry for the 9 men my cheating wife had affairs with. Being infected was punishment enough for all of them. I still left them behind in my thoughts, focusing instead on my future. Surprisingly, I felt a twinge of sympathy for Rebecca. Not forgiveness. I wasn't there yet. Maybe never would be. But she was facing this illness largely alone, abandoned by the men who'd helped put her in this position. It was just perhaps, but also incredibly sad. By sunset, I knew what I needed to do. I returned home after midnight. The house was quiet, but a lamp burned in the living room where Rebecca sat waiting, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the warmth of the evening. Her medication made her feel cold all the time now. "We need to talk," I said, sitting across from her. She nodded, her face resigned. She knew what was coming, had probably known since the moment I caught her with Jason. I want a divorce. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, just nodded again, accepting the inevitable. I understand. I'll help you get settled somewhere. Make sure your insurance continues covering your treatments. But I can't stay in this marriage, Rebecca. Not after everything. I know, she whispered. I wouldn't expect you to. Her quiet acceptance somehow made it harder. Part of me had expected her to fight, to beg, to make promises we both knew she couldn't keep. Her resignation was both a relief and strangely disappointing. You don't seem surprised, I said. I'm not. I've had 3 months to come to terms with losing you. She pulled the blanket tighter. I destroyed us long before you found out. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. I leaned forward, needing answers to questions that had haunted me for months. Why, Rebecca? Was I such a terrible husband that you needed to seek comfort with 9 different men? No, she said firmly. You were a good husband. This wasn't about you. It was about me, my emptiness, my selfishness. She paused. Maybe also my fear of growing old, of being invisible. These men, they made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. I saw you, I countered. Every day. You saw who you thought I was, who I pretended to be. She looked down at her hands. I didn't know how to be that person anymore, but I was too much of a coward to tell you. We talked for hours, excavating the ruins of our marriage. For the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt like I was speaking with a real Rebecca, not the perfect wife I believed in for years, nor the villain who had emerged in her place, but a flawed, complicated woman who had made devastating choices. By dawn, we had a plan. I would file for divorce, but continue supporting her financially through her illness. She would move to a condo closer to her sister in Providence. We would divide our assets fairly, with no acrimony. It was the least painful solution to an irreparably painful situation. As morning light filtered through the windows, Rebecca reached across the coffee table and tentatively touched my hand. I'm sorry, Michael. Not just for getting sick, not just for putting you at risk, but for breaking the promises I made to you. You deserve better. I didn't pull away from her touch. Yes, I agreed. I did. And now I'm going to find it. 1 year later, I stood in the empty foyer of the house that had once been our home. The real estate agent had just left with the final paperwork. The sale was complete. 15 years of memories, both beautiful and painful, would now belong to the young family that was moving in next week. I'd moved to a downtown Boston apartment 6 months earlier, after the divorce was finalized. Rebecca had relocated to Providence as planned, living in a small condo near her sister. We spoke occasionally, brief, polite conversations about logistics, insurance, or her health updates. Her condition was stable, the medications keeping the virus at bay. She'd even started volunteering at an AIDS awareness organization, speaking to young women about the risks of unprotected sex and infidelity. I took one last walk through the empty rooms, footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. In the kitchen, I remembered countless dinners prepared together, wine-fueled conversations about her dreams. In the living room, movie nights and lazy Sunday afternoons reading side by side. Each room held the ghosts of our former life. But those ghosts no longer haunted me. The rage that had once consumed me had gradually mellowed into something like acceptance. Not forgiveness. I wasn't sure I'd ever truly forgive Rebecca, but I'd stopped allowing her betrayal to define my future. Outside, I locked the door for the last time and placed the key under the mat for the new owners, as arranged. As I walked to my car, my phone chimed with a text message from Sarah, the woman I'd been dating for the past 3 months. We'd met at a friend's dinner party. She was divorced too. No children. Worked as an architect. Our relationship was taking its time, building slowly on a foundation of radical honesty. I told her everything about Rebecca on our second date, unwilling to enter another relationship shadowed by secrets. Good luck with the house closing, Sarah's message read. Dinner at my place tonight to celebrate. I smiled and texted back my acceptance. This was what moving forward looked like. Not forgetting the past, but not being imprisoned by it either. As I drove away from the house for the last time, I thought about the journey of the past year. I'd learned painful lessons about trust and betrayal, about resilience and self-preservation. I discovered that walking away from someone you once loved isn't always an act of cruelty. Sometimes it's the only way to save yourself. I didn't feel sorry for the 9 men my cheating wife had affairs with. Being infected was punishment enough for all of them. I still left that chapter of my life behind, focusing instead on writing a new one, a story entirely my own, no longer tangled with Rebecca's deceptions. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. I was Michael Donovan, survivor of betrayal, negative for HIV, positive for a future I was finally ready to embrace.